Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Saturday, January 27th, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, Donald Trump has been hit with tens of millions of dollars in damages for defaming E. Jean Carroll. Plus, congressional fights over immigration continue, and we look at how one state is leading the way on clean energy. A federal civil jury has ruled that former President Donald Trump must pay advice columnist E. Jean Carroll $83.3 million for defaming her in 2019 when he denied her allegations of sexual assault. Trump immediately took to social media to call the verdict, quote, absolutely ridiculous, unquote. His lawyers said they will appeal. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours to reach the verdict, which includes $18.3 million in compensatory damages and $65 million in punitive damages. Trump's last remaining rival in the Republican primary, Nikki Haley, wasted no time in using this as an example of why she said she would make a better candidate for Republican voters. Friday's verdict is in addition to the $5 million that Trump was already told he'll have to pay Carroll after a different jury found last May that he sexually abused her in a dressing room at Bergdorf Goodman in the 1990s. After Carroll went public with her allegations, her attorneys say Trump unleashed his supporters on her. Her attorneys showed the jury a sampling of the messages she received, including one saying, quote, stick a gun in your mouth and pull the trigger, unquote. The judge, Lewis Kaplan, dismissed the jurors in the case by telling them that they are free to speak publicly, but his advice was that they shouldn't. Colorado voters challenging the qualifications of former President Donald Trump said in a court filing yesterday that he's making a political, not legal argument for why the Supreme Court should allow him on the ballot. Lawyers said that Trump is threatening there will be bedlam if he's not on the ballot. At issue is wording of the Constitution's insurrection clause and whether Trump incited an insurrection when his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in 2021. 6 Republican and unaffiliated voters successfully sued to keep Trump off the ballot for Colorado's March election. After a divided state Supreme Court upheld that decision, it was put on hold while Trump makes his case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Trump, in his main filing last week, said that ballot disqualification efforts, quote, promise to unleash chaos and bedlam, unquote. And he urged the court to put a swift end to the efforts in Colorado and around the country. Trump's legal arguments include that the insurrection provision of the 14th Amendment does not apply to the presidency. Trump's lawyers also wrote that even if it does, Trump did not engage in insurrection. Attorneys for the other side said Trump summoned and incited an angry crowd to disrupt the certification of his electoral defeat. They wrote that the attack on the Capitol meets any definition of insurrection against the Constitution. Congressional battles over the border and immigration continue, and lawmakers appear to be at split ends. I caught up with USA Today Congress campaigns and Democracy Reporter Ken Tran for the latest. Ken, thanks for hopping on the Excerpt today.
Thanks for having me, Taylor.
So, Ken, legislative fights over the border are heating up, and House Speaker Mike Johnson has warned that a Senate bipartisan border and immigration deal is likely dead on arrival in the House. What's the latest here?
Sure. So, Senate negotiators started these bipartisan talks on changing border policy and migrant policy 4 months ago. The Senate, not known for its speed, has slowly progressed through those negotiations, and they appear to be moving through those final stages. We still don't know what the text is and what exactly the legislation will entail, but House Speaker Mike Johnson appears to already be almost drawing a red line here, saying that any bipartisan bill out of the Senate is going to be dead on arrival if it doesn't resemble what the House already passed last year, a partisan border bill referred to as H.R. 2. That's what Johnson has really been pushing for.
You know, the border is clearly shaping up to be a major issue in the 2024 election. How are Donald Trump and Joe Biden influencing lawmakers on how this plays out?
So it's important to know that Republicans are really making immigration a focus into 2024 to reclaim the White House, the Senate, and maybe expand their majority in the House. So what emerged this week was that as these negotiations in the Senate were progressing to its final steps, Trump has already expressed opposition to this border deal under the logic that if there is something that passes and President Joe Biden signs it, that would give Biden a victory and they wouldn't be able to as hammer Democrats as strongly on the border.
And, you know, the House GOP also plans to bring a vote to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Why do they argue this is necessary, Ken?
A lot of House Republicans have been clamoring to impeach Mayorkas since they took control of the majority. They accuse him as sort of one of the root causes of the crisis at the southern border. They say that he has failed to uphold his duty as Secretary of Homeland Security. But it is important to note that Democrats contend that there is not exactly an impeachable offense for someone for what they say is a dereliction of duty. Impeachment requires high crimes or misdemeanors, and what Republicans are saying doesn't really amount to that.
What's next for this legislative fight around the border and immigration going forward?
So the Senate left on Thursday afternoon, but negotiators promised that they would continue these talks over the weekend. Important to note is that it seems that a lot of the policy talks have settled. Now the matter is appropriations. How is the money going to be spent to accommodate this bill?
And Ken, we know Congress voted to avoid a government shutdown last week with a short-term stopgap measure. There hasn't been any progress toward a longer budget solution since then. What's the latest here, and what are some of the deadlines we need to keep an eye out for?
So Congress is still hoping to pass a longer-term budget with 12 different appropriation bills for various functions of the government. The newest stopgap pushed the deadlines to March 1st and March 8th. So on the March 1st deadline, those programs that will expire are related to agriculture, military construction, veterans affairs, transportation, housing, urban development, and energy and water-related programs. All the other remaining spending and funding of the government expires on March 8th.
Ken Tran covers Congress, campaigns, and democracy for USA Today. Thanks as always, Ken.
Thank you.
The top United Nations court yesterday ordered Israel to take measures to limit death and destruction in Gaza. The move came as part of a case brought by South Africa, alleging that Israel's actions in the territory amount to genocide. The court stopped short of ordering a ceasefire in Gaza, which South Africa had requested. The order from the International Court of Justice is the first step in a wider case about whether Israel is committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. But it's unlikely to have an immediate impact. Israel has vowed to press ahead until it destroys Hamas and secures the release of hostages that were taken in the October 7th attacks. Hamas took around 250 hostages to Gaza in that October violence and killed more than 1,200 people in Israel. An estimated 100 Israelis remain in captivity. Since October 7th, Israel has killed more than 26,000 Palestinians and displaced many more in a territory where Gazans have limited places to run or hide. You can stay up on all the latest from the conflict on usatoday.com. One state is quickly becoming America's clean energy paradise. I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Elizabeth Weise to learn more. Beth, always a pleasure to have you on.
Happy to be here.
So, Beth, how is Hawaii in kind of a league of its own when it comes to clean energy?
The United States eventually, probably not as fast as it should, but eventually we're going to get to 100% carbon-free energy. But it turns out that Hawaii is going to be the state that gets there first. When I heard that, I was like, well, actually, that kind of makes sense. Close to 1 million Americans every year go to Hawaii because it is this fantastic tropical paradise. It's wonderful. And if you go there, you know it's in the freaking middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's way the heck out there. It doesn't have any fossil fuels, doesn't have coal, doesn't have natural gas, doesn't have oil. All of their power for as long as they've been a more industrialized place has come from imported coal and then oil, a little bit of natural gas, but it's really coal and oil. And it's really expensive to ship all of that across the Pacific. So they have a really big incentive to switch to basically solar because they have so much solar. Actually, they have a lot of geothermal too because they have a lot of volcanoes. And so Hawaii kind of made a decision as a state a couple of years ago to say we really need to shift away from fossil fuels. Hawaii has said, we're going to do this and we're going to do it soon. They're going to do it sooner than any other state because it makes a lot of financial sense for them.
How have they really been able to do this, Beth? You mentioned some of the ways, but is this a legislative effort? How have they gotten to this point?
So legislatively, they have said they wanted to be coal-free by 23, which they managed to do. They actually closed their last power plant, their coal-fired power plant in 2022, because it costs a lot of money to ship coal all the way to Hawaii. They have subsidized solar energy, which again makes a lot of sense because boy, do they have a lot of sun. They actually have a really high penetration of electric cars. They're up at 15% of the new cars sold in Hawaii are electric. The two things that are hardest for people who have electric cars or who think about it is, oh, I have range anxiety. Well, you can't drive that far on any of the islands because they're not that big. And it's very tied to the price of gasoline. And gasoline, if you've ever rented a car in Hawaii, it's really expensive there. And then the other thing, and kind of the reason that I started writing this story, is on Oahu, they just built this enormous battery that allows them to store some of the sun's energy that they get during the height of the day when they get so much solar energy they can't actually use it all, and store it so that they're able to use it at night once the sun goes down, which is when they actually need that oomph of power. So they built this big battery, which is able to make up like 16% of the power on that island, which is the most populated of the Hawaiian Islands. The other really interesting thing about Hawaii is they have a ton of rooftop solar. I mean, I live in San Francisco and a lot of people have rooftop solar, but boy, 37% of Hawaiian homes have rooftop solar, which again makes perfect sense because boy, do they have a lot of sun. That makes up 44% of their state's renewable energy. So they're really poised to make use of this free energy from the sun that they get so much of already. And they've kind of doubled down and said, yeah, this is a really good idea. We're going to make this work. So that was cool. But I think the real takeaway is, again, close to 1 million Americans go to Hawaii every year because it's such a fantastic place. It's beautiful. It's clean, it's green, the lights turn on, the air conditioning works, the luau's are fantastic, and yet it is this increasingly a place that is kind of a poster child for what a post-fossil fuel world can look like.
Elizabeth Weise, great insight about the Aloha State. Thanks for hopping on. Appreciate you, Beth.
Happy to be here, as always.
Be sure to tune into the Excerpt tomorrow when my colleague Dana Taylor talks to Vince Conitzer with the Institute for Ethics at the University of Oxford about the unleashing of powerful AI tools without any guardrails. You can find the episode right here on this feed. And thanks for listening to the Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods. And if you use a smart speaker, just ask for the Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back Monday with more of the Excerpt from USA Today.